Well, good day, everyone. This is Chris back again with the Ancient Scholar. So today I'm going to be talking about cancer, and specifically I'm going to be talking about lung cancer because this is a respiratory pathophysiology course. There are many different types of cancer. I just want to go ahead and focus, at least for today, on lung cancer. The book that I will be referencing fairly highly today is going to be this book here. It is not on your list of requirements. I just want to let everyone know the material I'll be using, so there aren't any copyright issues there or any legal issues. The book I'll be using is called Pathophysiology Made Incredibly Easy. This is the 3rd edition. Very good book, really good basic pathophysiology book if you want a really kind of a comprehensive pathophys. And it's really easy to understand. Anybody in nursing is probably very familiar with the Incredibly Easy series of books. They do Fluid and Electrolytes Made Incredibly Easy, all kinds of diseases, ICU, ER, so on and so forth. So it's a really good resource for nurses, but I think definitely for respiratory therapy, we have some very good specific applications with this book. So what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to be talking about cancer. So what is cancer, first of all? Well, cancer involves malfunction of genes, for the most part. Genes, we'll talk a little more about genetic issues in subsequent videos. But for now, genes obviously are involved in DNA. When DNA is copied, and of course DNA is the blueprint, the cell, it's copied into RNA, and ribosomes use RNA, read the RNA, and they make things like proteins and so on and so forth. That's how the cell makes stuff. These genes malfunction for a variety of reasons that we'll get into, and ultimately what this does is this leads to abnormal cell growth and cell division. So, I have abnormal cells that are growing and dividing, and these cells have lost their specific or specialized function. They overcrowd the other cells, the normal cells, and they're very hungry for nutrients and blood, and basically they starve all these other cells. And these other cells die, or they're consumed, they're pushed away, or they're transformed into these cancerous cells, and the cancer becomes a tumor. Tumor grows, eventually spreads into what's known as metastasis. So, what causes cancer? Lots of different causes for cancer. Lots of different causes. We'll talk about some of the major suspected causes. Believe it or not, viruses can cause or are associated with cancer, as you know, and we'll actually talk about bacteria and viruses a little later on in the pathophysiology course. But viruses have been known to transform cells, because what do viruses do? Well, they attach to the cell and they inject their genetic material into the cell, and then the cell becomes a virus production factory. It makes lots of viruses, and then the cell eventually pops, lyses, and dies and releases viruses, and those viruses go out. That's a typical life cycle of a virus. So obviously viral infections can be associated with cancer. Certain types, like the Epstein-Barr virus, the HPV or human papillomavirus, and cervical cancer, cervical cancer, CMV or cytomegalovirus virus, the herpes simplex virus, even hepatitis B has been associated with cancer. Some other things that we need to be very careful about: ultraviolet exposure. Exposure to the sun. People that get sunburns, especially people that are younger, before the age of 18. When there's lots of cell division going on, lots of development going on, and a higher chance of damaging that precious DNA. Radiation exposure can cause that. People that work in the nuclear industry, certain medical imaging modalities, nuclear medicine, and so on and so forth. Some of the big things that we need to worry about in respiratory therapy are exposure to airborne exposure, obviously with lung cancer, since we're talking about that. What do you think the big one is? Cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking is a huge cause of cancer. One of the biggest preventable causes of cancer. Cigarette smoking can not only cause lung cancer, but it's been associated with pancreatic cancer, bladder, mouth, kidney, and even esophageal cancer. Asbestos exposure. Asbestos, of course, we know is fireproof, and it was actually very prolific. Lots of buildings had asbestos in their ceiling tiles to prevent fire, and people that were exposed to asbestos industrially developed very specific types of cancer known as mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is a very special type of cancer, very poor prognosis, not a good cancer to have, associated with asbestos exposure. Okay, let's see here. Immune problems, really big cause of cancer, and people that are immunosuppressed or have some sort of immune system issue are going to be at higher risk for developing cancer. This includes patients that have had organ transplants. If you've had an organ transplant, you take immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of your life to prevent the immune system from rejecting that transplanted organ. These patients are going to be at higher risk for developing cancers. Another thing that we need to worry about, HIV. People with human immunodeficiency virus. So HIV is a virus that causes AIDS. Now we know that you can have HIV and not have AIDS. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, occurs when HIV has ravaged the body to the point where your special type of white blood cell, called the CD4 white blood cell, drops below a certain level. And when that happens, you go into AIDS. So let's just differentiate HIV from AIDS. HIV is the virus that causes AIDS. AIDS is generally, when you develop AIDS, it's generally more the later stages, the end stage of an HIV infection. Well, those patients, obviously, because HIV attacks the white blood cells, and white blood cells are the immune part of the immune system, those patients are going to be immunosuppressed. They're going to be immunocompromised. Hey, there's my clock again. What do you know? It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm still doing videos. So these patients would be high risk for cancers. Certain types of cancers that are associated with HIV, Kaposi sarcoma is a big one, but also Hodgkin's lymphoma, and lung cancers as well, to a lesser extent. Some other things, genetics. Believe it or not, genetics plays a huge role in cancer. Anywhere from 5 to 10% of all cancers have a genetic link. From a side note, this is not cancer related, but this is still important to know. There's actually a genetic link with some people that develop chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, even if they don't smoke, even if they don't inhale lots of bad air or live in pollution prone areas. And there is a substance that the body produces, alpha A1 antitrypsin. It helps protect the lung. People can have a genetic defect where they do not produce the alpha A1 antitrypsin, and they can end up developing chronic obstructive pulmonary disease even if they have never smoked in their life, never had significant pollution exposure. They can develop chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, simply because they have a genetic predisposition to that. So don't assume that all patients that have COPD are smokers, because that may not necessarily be the case. Maybe a genetic cause for that. Okay, so getting back to the cancer that we were talking about. Let's go ahead and talk about lung cancer specifically now. I'm going to go a little over my 10-minute mark on this video, but that's okay. This is a pretty important topic to talk about. So lung cancer. Lung cancer is largely preventable. We know the things that are highly associated with lung cancer. Smoking is the biggest thing. People that smoke have a much higher incidence of lung cancer. That should come as no surprise in this day and age. So obviously, lifestyle modification can be very helpful here. Well, there are basically two general categories of lung cancer, if you want to look at it that way. There's something called, small cell lung cancer and non-small cell lung cancer. And I think what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and cut off here, and I'll pick up in another video. That way we can kind of break this up. Okay, guys, take care.